The old grand piano sat in the corner of Café Luminoso, morning sunlight dancing across its polished surface. Elena Morales paused while wiping down tables, her eyes drawn to it like they were every morning before customers arrived. The restaurant wouldn't open for another hour, and most of the staff hadn't shown up yet. She glanced over her shoulder. Only Mr. Rodriguez was there, busy in the kitchen preparing for the day. Elena set down her cloth and walked slowly toward the piano, her fingers tingling with a familiar yearning. Just 5 minutes, she told herself. 5 minutes wouldn't hurt anyone. Elena slipped onto the bench, her waitress uniform crinkling as she sat. She rested her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. A deep breath, and then she began to play. The notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the empty restaurant. Elena closed her eyes, letting her hands remember what her mind had never forgotten. Each chord, each delicate run up and down the keyboard came from somewhere deep inside her, a place she only visited in these stolen moments. In another life, Elena would be preparing for a concert right now, not for a day of taking orders and clearing plates. At 28, she should have been well into her career as a pianist. That had been the plan anyway. Before everything changed, I didn't know you could play like that. Elena's hands froze on the keys. Mr. Rodriguez stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, a mixing bowl in his hands, flour dusting his apron. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, standing up. "I know I should be finishing the tables." No. Mr. Rodriguez shook his head, walking closer. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that?" Elena hesitated, then sat back down. "I've played since I was 6. My teacher was a Russian woman, Mrs. Abramovich. She taught at the conservatory." Mr. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. "Irina Abramovich? The famous pianist? You know of her?" Elena asked, surprised. "My wife loves classical music. She has recordings of Mrs. Abramovich playing Rachmaninoff." He gestured at the piano. "But why are you here working as a waitress if you can play like that?" Elena looked down at her hands. These same hands that could coax such beauty from the piano now spent their days carrying trays and inputting orders into the restaurant. System, life happened, she said simply. What she didn't say was how her mother had gotten sick during Elena's first year at music school, how the medical bills had piled up, insurance covering less than half, how she'd dropped out to work full-time, promising herself it would just be temporary. That was 7 years ago. Her mother had recovered, thankfully, but the debts remained. And somehow temporary had stretched into something that felt permanent. "I still practice when I can," Elena added, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. "The community center near my apartment has a piano anyone can use. It's not like this one, though. The piano at Café Luminoso was a Steinway, probably worth more than what Elena would earn in 5 years of waitressing. The owner, Mr. Pearson, had bought it when he'd decided to add live music to the evenings, turning the upscale restaurant into an even more exclusive spot. "You should play for Mr. Pearson," Rodriguez said. "He pays that pianist every night, and honestly, what I just heard was better than anything that guy does." Elena shook her head quickly. "No, I couldn't. This job is important to me. I can't risk it." The truth was, Elena was afraid. Not just of losing her job if Mr. Pearson thought she was overstepping, but of putting herself out there again. Of remembering what it felt like to have music be the center of her life, only to have to walk away from it once more. The front door chimed as someone entered. Lisa, another waitress, arrived for her shift, calling out a greeting. Elena quickly stood up from the piano bench. "Our secret," Mr. Rodriguez said with a wink before heading back to the kitchen. Elena nodded gratefully and returned to her tables, pushing away the lingering notes still echoing in her mind. The day passed in its usual blur of activity. Café Luminoso catered to a wealthy clientele, business people having lunch meetings, ladies who shopped all morning and needed a break for wine and salads, tourists willing to pay premium prices for the restaurant's acclaimed Mediterranean cuisine. Elena moved between tables with practiced ease, smiling at the right moments, making recommendations, keeping water glasses filled and tables cleared efficiently. The work wasn't difficult, just tiring in its repetition. And unlike playing the piano, it left no room for expression or passion. During a brief lull in the afternoon, Elena overheard Mr. Pearson talking to the manager. "Rose, tomorrow night's event is critical," he was saying. his voice tense. "Half the city's music patrons will be here, including Victor Walsh." Elena's heart skipped at the name. Victor Walsh was the conductor of the city symphony, known for discovering new talent, and for his cutting remarks about musicians he found lacking. "James will be here to play, right?" Rose asked, referring to the regular evening pianist. "Absolutely. I've confirmed with him twice. Walsh apparently requested specific pieces for James to perform between dinner courses. The man's a terror, but his influence is worth the trouble." Elena finished her side work that evening with special care, knowing tomorrow would be especially busy. As she left, she glanced at the piano one last time. The night pianist, James, was setting up his music sheets, getting ready for the evening crowd. He had technical skill, she had to admit, but he played without heart, too concerned with showing off his speed to capture the emotion of the pieces. Her tiny apartment welcomed her with familiar silence. Elena set down her bag and kicked off her shoes, her feet aching from the long day of standing. The walls were thin, and she could hear her neighbor's television through them, some game show with an enthusiastic audience. She opened her refrigerator, pulling out leftovers from the night before. As the food heated in the microwave, Elena looked at the small electric keyboard pushed against the wall in her living room. It was nothing like a real piano. The keys were lighter. The sound tinny and electronic, but it was something. After eating, Elena sat down at the keyboard, plugged in her headphones so she wouldn't disturb her neighbors, and began to play the piece she'd been working on for weeks, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was technically demanding, with its thunderous chords and intricate passages requiring both power and delicacy. Mrs. Abramovich had always said Elena had a gift for Rachmaninoff. "You understand the storm and the quiet within the same piece," she'd told her. Not many young pianists can do that. Elena's fingers stumbled over a particularly difficult section, and she started again, focusing intensely. In her mind, she wasn't playing a budget keyboard in a cramped apartment, but performing on a concert grand piano in a hall filled with attentive listeners. She practiced until her hands cramped and her neighbors thumped on the wall, signaling it was getting late. Only then did Elena reluctantly put away her headphones and prepare for bed. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind wandered to tomorrow's special event at the restaurant. All those important music people would be there, including Victor Walsh. Not that it mattered to her. She'd be invisible in her waitress uniform, just another person bringing food and clearing plates. Still, there was something both painful and thrilling about being so close to the world she'd once dreamed of joining, like standing outside a window looking in at a warm, bright room where you once belonged. Elena's alarm rang too early the next morning. Another day of serving others awaited. She dressed quickly in her black uniform, pulling her dark hair into a neat bun as required by the restaurant's appearance policy. On her way to work, she passed a poster for the City Symphony's upcoming season. New faces had been added to the regular musicians, people who had achieved what she had once aimed for. Elena didn't let herself pause to look at it too closely. Some doors were better left firmly shut. What she didn't know was that tomorrow, one of those doors would unexpectedly swing open again, changing everything. The morning of the big event, Café Luminoso buzzed with nervous energy. Elena arrived early to find extra staff had been called in, and the usually calm Mr. Pearson was checking and rechecking details with an intensity that made everyone tiptoe around him. "Elena," Rose waved her over as soon as she walked through the door. "I've got your section assignment for tonight." She handed Elena a map of the dining room with several tables highlighted in yellow. Elena's stomach dropped when she saw which tables she'd be serving. Right in the center of the room, the prime spots, including the large round table marked Walsh Party. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rose nodded. "You're one of our best, and Mr. Pearson specifically asked for you to handle the Walsh table. They're the guests of honor, but no buts. This is a big opportunity for the restaurant." Rose squeezed her shoulder. "Just be your usual professional self and everything will be fine." Easy for her to say, Elena thought. Rose didn't know what it meant to serve people like Victor Walsh, people who could have been her colleagues in another life. The day crawled by as they prepared. Fresh flowers were delivered and arranged on each table. The regular menus were set aside for special ones printed just for this evening. The chef had created a unique four-course meal that would showcase the restaurant's finest offerings. Elena helped polish every piece of silverware until it gleamed. She dusted wine glasses, making sure not a single fingerprint remained. Work kept her hands busy while her mind wandered to places she normally avoided. As afternoon faded into evening, the staff gathered for a final briefing. "Tonight is not just another dinner service," Mr. Pearson announced, his usual easygoing manner replaced with tight-lipped seriousness. "These guests support the arts throughout the city. They fund scholarships, endow chairs in the symphony, and decide which venues thrive and which close. Impress them, and our bookings will be solid for months." He went on to detail the special protocols for the evening, which wines to suggest, how to time the courses, when to approach tables and when to hang back. And most importantly, he finished, "James will be playing selected pieces throughout the evening. Mr. Walsh himself requested music between courses. Under no circumstances should service interrupt the performances." The staff dispersed to change into their formal uniforms, black pants and vests over crisp white shirts, bow ties for everyone. Elena tied her hair back neatly, applied minimal makeup, and took a deep breath. She could do this. It was just another shift. The guests began arriving at 7, men in expensive suits, women draped in designer dresses and jewelry that caught the light from the chandeliers. Elena moved among them with practiced ease, taking drink orders, offering appetizers, keeping her face pleasantly neutral. At 7:30, a ripple of awareness moved through the room. Victor Walsh had arrived. He was shorter than Elena had imagined from seeing his photos in the newspaper, but his presence filled the space as he entered. Silver-haired with piercing blue eyes, he walked with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. 5 other people trailed behind him, 2 older couples and a younger man carrying what looked like a music portfolio. Mr. Pearson rushed forward to greet them personally, showing them to the round table in the center of the room, Elena's table. "Your waitress this evening will be Elena," Mr. Pearson said, gesturing toward her as she approached. "She'll take excellent care of you." Walsh barely glanced at her, already deep in conversation with one of his companions. Elena introduced herself quietly and took their drink orders, relieved to step away from the table and its intimidating occupants. As she waited at the bar for their drinks, she overheard snippets of conversation from the Walsh party. "The program for next season is nearly finalized, but I'm still not satisfied with the piano soloist options for the Tchaikovsky. What about that young man from the Berlin competition? Too mechanical. All technique, no soul. I need someone who understands the heart of the piece." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she arranged the drinks on her tray. These casual words represented dreams and careers, the world she had once aimed for. The evening progressed smoothly through the first course. James, the pianist, played a selection of light classical pieces, Debussy, some Mozart. Nothing too demanding, but pleasant background music that added to the elegant atmosphere. During the main course, Mr. Pearson approached the center of the room and gently tapped a spoon against a wine glass. The conversations quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen, as arranged with our guest of honor, we'll now enjoy a brief musical interlude before dessert is served. James will play Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata." Polite applause followed as James settled at the piano bench. Elena positioned herself near the kitchen door, waiting for the performance to end before serving the next course. The first notes rang out, and Elena immediately noticed something was off. The tempo was rushed. The emotional opening chords played with technical correctness but no depth. She tried not to wince as James pushed through the piece, showing off his speed but missing the soul of the music. When he finished, the applause was tepid. Elena could see Walsh leaning over to whisper something to the woman beside him, his expression unimpressed. As Elena served dessert, a delicate lemon soufflé, she moved carefully, trying to remain invisible. But as she placed Walsh's plate before him, he looked up at her. "Tell me," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "What did you think of that performance?" Elena froze, dessert spoon still in hand. "Excuse me, sir?" "The Beethoven. What did you think of it?" Everyone at the table was looking at her now. Mr. Pearson, from across the room, had noticed the exchange and was watching with obvious concern. "I don't think my opinion matters much, sir," Elena said carefully. "Humor me." Walsh's eyes were sharp, evaluating. I'm curious what the staff thinks of our entertainment. Elena hesitated. She could say something bland and diplomatic, finish serving and escape. That would be the smart thing to do. Instead, she found herself speaking the truth. The technical execution was impressive, she said quietly, but Beethoven wrote the Pathétique during a time of personal crisis. There's supposed to be a sense of struggle in it, a reaching for something just beyond grasp. That didn't come through. Silence fell over the table. The woman beside Walsh raised her eyebrows. Walsh himself looked startled, then intrigued. You know your classical music, he said, studying her more carefully now. Elena felt her cheeks burning. Just a personal interest, sir. Will there be anything else with your dessert? Before Walsh could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Mr. Pearson was speaking with James, who was gesturing angrily, his face flushed. After a moment, James grabbed his coat and stormed out of the restaurant. Mr. Pearson hurried over to Walsh's table, apology written all over his face. I'm so sorry for the disturbance, he said. It seems our pianist has had a personal emergency and needed to leave. He shot a quick, panicked glance at Elena before continuing. I'm afraid we'll have to cancel the final musical selection for the evening. Walsh frowned. That's disappointing. My guests were looking forward to the Liszt piece we discussed. I understand, and again I apologize deeply for the inconvenience. Please enjoy your desserts on the house tonight. As Mr. Pearson turned to leave, Walsh's voice stopped him. Wait. Earlier, your waitress seemed quite knowledgeable about music. His eyes found Elena again. Do you play by any chance? All eyes turned to her. Elena felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Mr. Pearson looked confused, then concerned. Sir, I'm sure Elena is needed to, he began. I'm asking her, Walsh interrupted, his tone making it clear he wasn't used to being redirected. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. 7 years of keeping her past locked away, and now this man was casually prying it open in front of everyone. I used to play, she admitted, her voice barely audible over the ambient restaurant noise. Used to? Walsh pressed. Yes, sir, but it's been some time since I've performed for anyone. Walsh leaned back in his chair, a strange smile playing at his lips. Well, perhaps tonight could change that. Elena glanced desperately at Mr. Pearson, who looked equally lost. I don't think that would be appropriate, she started to say, but Walsh cut her off. I'm curious now, he said, his voice carrying so that nearby tables turned to listen. A waitress who can critique Beethoven interpretations must have some skill herself. Why don't you play something for us? It wasn't really a question. It was a challenge. Elena could feel it in the sudden tension around the table, see it in the amused glances exchanged between Walsh's companions. They were expecting entertainment of a different sort now, the humbling of a server who had dared to have an opinion on things beyond her station. I really should finish my duties, Elena said, desperately looking for escape. I insist, Walsh said, the smile not reaching his eyes. Unless you were merely repeating something you heard a real musician say? The implied insult stung. 7 years ago, Elena would have been considered a real musician, one with promise, with a future. The unfairness of his assumption sparked something inside her. Mr. Pearson stepped closer, clearly torn between wanting to please his important guest and protecting his employee. Perhaps another night. When Elena is prepared, he suggested. No, Walsh said firmly. I'd like to hear her play now. Surely you can spare her for one piece? Mr. Pearson looked at Elena, helplessness in his eyes. She knew he couldn't refuse Walsh outright. It's okay, she found herself saying, though it wasn't. I can play something short. As she set down her serving tray and walked toward the piano, Elena felt as though she were moving through a dream. The restaurant had gone quiet, all eyes following her unexpected journey from server to performer. The weight of what was about to happen settled on her shoulders as she approached the gleaming grand piano that until now she had only dared to touch in empty morning hours. Elena's legs felt like they might give out as she approached the piano. The polished black surface reflected the overhead lights, and she could see her distorted reflection in it, still dressed in her waitress uniform, not the elegant concert attire she once dreamed of wearing while performing. The room had gone so quiet she could hear the soft clink of silverware being set down as people turned to watch. She felt the weight of every gaze, especially Walsh's, as she lowered herself onto the bench. For a terrible moment, Elena thought she might forget how to play altogether. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. What was she doing? This wasn't some community center practice room or her tiny apartment with no one listening. These were music patrons, professionals, critics, people who could destroy what little confidence she had left with a single dismissive laugh. Someone coughed. Another whispered something she couldn't quite hear. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Elena closed her eyes. She thought of her old teacher, Mrs. Abramovich, and what she would say in this moment. Probably something like, "Music does not care what clothes you wear or what job you have. Music only asks if you can speak its language." She placed her fingers on the cool keys, without announcing what she would play because honestly, she hadn't decided until that very second. Elena began the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The powerful, resonant chords filled the restaurant immediately. She heard a few gasps at her unexpected choice. Not a simple piece to showcase a waitress's parlor trick, but one of the most emotionally charged works in the piano repertoire. Elena kept her eyes closed, letting her fingers find their way from muscle memory built over thousands of hours of practice. The thunderous introduction gave way to the more delicate middle section, and she felt herself begin to relax into the familiar emotional landscape of the piece. This was Rachmaninoff's darkness and light. His strength and vulnerability laid bare on the keys, and for the first time in 7 years, Elena was truly playing again. Not practicing, not remembering, but creating something live and real in the moment. She forgot about Walsh and his challenge. She forgot about being a waitress playing for wealthy patrons who expected to be amused by her failure. She even forgot about her own anxiety and the years of buried dreams. There was only the music now, flowing through her like electricity. Her body swayed slightly with the building intensity of the piece, her fingers dancing across the keys with precision and passion that came from somewhere beyond conscious thought. As she approached the final section, where the opening theme returns with even greater force, Elena finally opened her eyes. The room was completely still. Every face was turned toward her, expressions ranging from shock to wonder. At the center table, Walsh sat with his mouth slightly open, his dessert forgotten. The younger man beside him, the one who had been carrying the music portfolio, was leaning forward, watching her hands with intense concentration. Elena poured every bit of herself into the final chords. All the disappointment of abandoned dreams, the quiet dignity of working hard at a job that didn't fulfill her soul, and the fierce joy of reconnecting with her true passion. The last notes hung in the air, resonating through the room before fading to silence. Complete, absolute silence. Elena's hands rested in her lap. She stared down at them, afraid to look up and see the reaction. Had she embarrassed herself? Overreached? The piece was demanding, and she hadn't played on a real piano in front of an audience for so long. Then she heard it, a single person starting to clap. She looked up to see Mr. Rodriguez standing in the doorway to the kitchen, his face alight with pride as he applauded. The sound seemed to break a spell. Suddenly, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People at nearby tables were standing. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Elena felt her cheeks burning as she rose shakily from the bench and gave an awkward little bow, unsure of the proper protocol in this strange situation. When she dared to look at Walsh's table again, she found him studying her with an entirely different expression than before. Gone was the condescending smirk. In its place was something like wonder mixed with, was that embarrassment? He stood, and the clapping gradually quieted. "Young lady," Walsh said, his authoritative voice carrying across the room, "where did you learn to play like that?" Elena swallowed hard. "I studied with Mrs. Irina Abramovich until I was 18, she replied, her voice stronger than she expected. Whispers rippled through the room. Even those who weren't deeply involved in the classical music scene knew Abramovich's name. Irina Abramovich. Walsh repeated the name slowly. One of the greatest pianists of her generation. "And she taught you?" Elena nodded. "For how long?" 12 years. "From age 6 until I had to stop?" "Had to stop?" The younger man at Walsh's table spoke up now. "Why would anyone who plays like that stop?" The question hit a tender spot. Elena looked down, unsure how to answer without sharing more of her personal life than she wanted to reveal to a room full of strangers. Mr. Pearson stepped forward, perhaps sensing her discomfort. "Perhaps we should let Elena return to her duties and—" "No." Walsh cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "I want to understand this." He looked directly at Elena, You have extraordinary talent. Why are you serving desserts instead of performing? The bluntness of the question stung, but Elena lifted her chin slightly. Life doesn't always go as planned, sir. My mother got sick during my first year at music school. Someone needed to pay the bills. Understanding dawned on several faces. The expensive reality of medical care was something many could relate to, even if they hadn't personally experienced financial hardship. And now? The younger man asked. Your technique is still remarkable. You must practice, but when I can, Elena replied. Community centers, churches when they're empty. I have a keyboard at home. She gestured toward the piano. Nothing like this, though. Walsh was shaking his head slowly. It's a crime, he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder. It's an absolute crime that hands capable of playing like that are carrying trays. One of the women at his table leaned forward. Victor, isn't Daniel looking for soloists for the community outreach concerts? The younger man, Daniel, apparently nodded eagerly. Absolutely. We have a series of free concerts in neighborhoods throughout the city. They're meant to bring classical music to wider audiences. He looked at Elena with newfound professional interest. We pay our musicians, of course. It's not symphony rates, but it's respectable. Elena felt like the floor was shifting beneath her feet. Were they actually offering her a chance to play? After all this time? I don't know what to say, she stammered. I haven't performed publicly in years. You just did, Walsh pointed out, gesturing around the restaurant. And quite impressively. The woman beside Walsh opened her purse and pulled out a business card. I'm Helen Morris, the Symphony's Community Engagement Director. Call my office tomorrow. We should talk. She held out the card. Elena stepped forward and took it with fingers that still tingled from playing. The small rectangle of cardstock felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Thank you, she managed to say. Mr. Pearson was watching the exchange with a mixture of surprise and what looked like pride. Elena has been with us for 5 years, he said. She's one of our most valued employees. Was he worried about losing her? The thought was oddly touching. I'm sure she is, Walsh replied, though his tone suggested he still found it wasteful. He turned back to Elena. Play something else. It wasn't a request, but a command. Elena found herself walking back to the piano without hesitation. What would you like to hear? She asked, gaining confidence now. Walsh considered for a moment. Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat major. Elena smiled slightly. It was the very piece she played in those stolen morning moments when the restaurant was empty. Her fingers found the keys with the comfort of greeting an old friend. As she played, she noticed the tension had left her body. The fear was gone. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Not just Elena the waitress, but Elena the pianist. The person she was meant to be. The Nocturne's gentle, flowing melody seemed to wrap around the room like a warm embrace. Elena put all her heart into the piece, feeling the notes rise and fall with her breath. When the final chord faded, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Walsh was nodding now, a decisive look on his face. Daniel, he said to the younger man, adjust your schedule. I want her to play at the donor reception next week. Daniel looked surprised but quickly recovered. Of course. We'll need to work out the program, but I'll handle that. Walsh interrupted, his eyes still on Elena. Ms. I don't even know your last name. Morales, she supplied. Elena Morales. Ms. Morales, he continued. Can you take a day off from your duties here to rehearse with us? Say Monday? Elena looked at Mr. Pearson, who appeared somewhat overwhelmed by the turn of events, but nodded his approval. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I can do that. As the reality of what was happening began to sink in, Elena felt a curious mixture of emotions, joy, disbelief, vindication, and a touch of fear. What if she wasn't ready? What if all this was some cruel joke that would be snatched away tomorrow? But looking around at the faces watching her, Walsh's determined expression, Daniel's excited one, the warm smiles of the restaurant patrons, and the proud grin of Mr. Rodriguez still standing by the kitchen door, Elena allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, Elena woke up earlier than usual. For a moment, she stared at the ceiling, wondering if the events of the previous night had been a dream. The small business card on her nightstand proved otherwise. Helen Morris, Community Engagement Director, City Symphony. It was real. She picked up her phone and saw several text messages from her co-workers. Word had spread quickly through the restaurant staff about what had happened. Rose had sent 3 messages with multiple exclamation points. Mr. Rodriguez had simply written, "I told you so." Elena smiled and set the phone down. She needed time to process everything before responding to anyone. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. Could she really step back into the world of music after so long? Would she embarrass herself trying? She made coffee and carried the mug to her small keyboard. Sitting down, she began her usual warm-up exercises, but today they felt different. The weight of judgment, both Walsh's initial mockery and his later interest, lingered in her mind as her fingers moved across the keys. After an hour of practice, Elena looked at the clock. She had a regular Friday lunch shift starting at 11. Despite everything that had happened, bills still needed paying, and she wasn't about to call in sick based on a promise that might lead nowhere. When she arrived at Café Luminoso, however, the atmosphere had changed. Mr. Pearson greeted her at the door with unusual enthusiasm. "Elena, there you are. Could I speak with you in my office before you start your shift?" She followed him to the small room at the back of the restaurant, her stomach tightening with anxiety. Was he upset about last night? Had she violated some policy by playing the piano? Once inside, Mr. Pearson gestured for her to sit down. "First off," he said, taking his own seat behind the desk, "that was quite a performance last night." "Thank you," Elena replied cautiously. "I've been getting calls all morning. Apparently word has spread about our waitress who plays Rachmaninoff." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Victor Walsh himself called me at 7 this morning." Elena's eyebrows rose. "He did? Why?" "To tell me I should feel privileged to have you on staff for one thing." Mr. Pearson chuckled. "Not every day one of the most influential figures in the city's music scene calls to lecture me about appreciating my employees." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sorry if it caused any trouble." "Trouble? Quite the opposite." Mr. Pearson's expression softened. "Look, Elena, I've known you for 5 years and not once did you mention you had that kind of talent. Why didn't you ever say anything?" The question caught her off guard. "It wasn't relevant to serving tables," she said finally. "And honestly, it was painful to talk about." Mr. Pearson nodded slowly. "Well, it's relevant now. Walsh seems determined to drag you back into the music world whether you're ready or not." "What did he say exactly?" Elena asked. "He wants you to play at some donor event next week, and he implied rather strongly that I should be flexible with your schedule." Mr. Pearson smiled, "Which of course I'm happy to be. We can arrange your shifts around whatever you need for this opportunity." Relief flooded through her. "Really, you're not upset?" "Why would I be upset? One of my employees has an extraordinary talent that's finally being recognized. That's something to celebrate." He hesitated, then added, "Though I admit, I'm a bit worried we might lose you entirely if this takes off." The thought hadn't even occurred to Elena yet, that this might lead to something more permanent, something that could replace her job at the restaurant. It seemed too far-fetched. "I think it's just a one-time thing," she said, trying to manage her own expectations as much as his. "But thank you for being so understanding." Mr. Pearson waved away her thanks. "Now there's one more thing. After last night's performance, several regular customers asked if we might feature you playing occasionally." His eyes twinkled. "I'm thinking of creating a special night once a week. Piano evenings with Elena or something similar." Elena blinked in surprise. "You want me to play here?" "Regularly? With proper compensation, of course. As a pianist, not a waitress, though you're welcome to keep your regular shifts too." He named a figure that made Elena's eyes widen. "Would that interest you?" Would it interest her? To play regularly on a beautiful grand piano? To make extra money doing what she loved? "Yes," she said, finding her voice. "Yes, that would interest me very much." "Excellent." Mr. Pearson clapped his hands once. "Now go start your shift. We'll work out the details later." Elena left his office feeling like she was walking on air. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Regular customers who had been there the night before greeted her with newfound respect. Coworkers kept giving her thumbs-up signs from across the room. By the end of the day, she had told the story of her musical background at least a dozen times. That evening, after changing out of her work clothes, Elena finally worked up the courage to call the number on Helen Morris's business card. To her surprise, Helen answered personally. "Elena, I was hoping you'd call. Victor hasn't stopped talking about you all day." "He hasn't?" Elena couldn't hide her amazement. "Not at all. In fact, he's expanded his plans. The donor reception is just the beginning. He wants you to audition for the community concert series next Wednesday. Elena sank onto her couch, phone pressed to her ear. This is all happening so fast. That's Victor for you. When he discovers something or someone he's passionate about, he moves quickly. Helen's voice softened. But don't feel pressured. This is your journey, not his. I don't feel pressured, Elena said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I feel like I've been given a second chance I never expected. They spoke for almost an hour, with Helen explaining the details of the donor reception and the kinds of pieces she might want to prepare. By the end of the call, Elena had a clear schedule for the next week, including a Monday rehearsal at the Symphony Hall. Over the weekend, Elena practiced whenever she wasn't working. She dug out old sheet music from boxes she hadn't opened in years. Her fingers were sore by Sunday night, but it was a good kind of pain. The kind that reminded her she was building something, not just wearing herself down. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Elena stood outside the imposing glass doors of the city's Symphony Hall, heart pounding. The last time she'd been here was as a music student attending a performance with classmates. Now she was entering as what exactly? Not quite a professional, not anymore, but not just an amateur either. She pushed through the doors and gave her name to the security guard, who checked a list and directed her to rehearsal room B. Following his directions through the maze-like backstage area, Elena finally found the right door and knocked. "Come in," called a familiar voice. Elena entered to find a spacious room with a gleaming concert grand piano in the center. Daniel, the young man from Walsh's table, sat at a desk in the corner surrounded by papers. And there, standing by the piano with his arms crossed, was Victor Walsh himself. "Ah, Ms. Morales, prompt. I like that." Walsh gestured toward the piano. "Why don't you warm up while Daniel and I finish this discussion?" Elena nodded and set down her bag. She approached the piano with a feeling close to reverence. This was a Steinway concert grand, probably worth more than she would earn in 10 years of waiting tables. The keys felt different under her fingers, more responsive, more alive somehow. She began with simple scales, then moved into arpeggios, feeling the action of the piano adjusting to its touch. From the corner of her eye, she could see Walsh watching her, even as he continued his conversation with Daniel. After about 10 minutes, Walsh approached. "Good. Now for the donor reception, we need to impress people with both technical skill and emotional depth. These are individuals who can write substantial checks to support our programs, but they need to be moved to do so." He tapped the piano. "What pieces have you prepared?" Elena listed the selections she had been practicing. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, a bit of Debussy. Walsh nodded along, then stopped her. "The Rachmaninoff prelude you played at the restaurant, that should definitely be included. It suits your style." He paced as he talked. "But I'd also like to hear you play something more joyful, something that shows range. Perhaps the Mendelssohn Songs Without Words." "The Spring Song?" Elena suggested. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, perfect choice. Let's hear it." For the next 2 hours, Walsh worked with Elena on refining her program. His criticism was direct but not unkind, and Elena found herself rising to meet his expectations, playing with more confidence as the session progressed. "You have a natural instinct for the emotional core of these pieces," Walsh said during a break. "That can't be taught. Technique can be polished, but the ability to make listeners feel something, that's a gift." Elena absorbed the compliment silently, not quite sure how to respond. "I must admit," Walsh continued, looking slightly uncomfortable, "I owe you an apology for my behavior at the restaurant. I made assumptions based on your occupation." "It's okay," Elena said, though part of her appreciated hearing him acknowledge it. "You couldn't have known. That's no excuse," and Walsh's voice was firm. "Music doesn't care about a person's job or background. I should know that better than most." He checked his watch. "We should continue. The reception is only 3 days away and there's still much to do." As they resumed work, Elena felt something shift inside her, a settling, a recognition. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't just remembering what it felt like to be a musician. She was being one again right now in this moment, and it felt like coming home. The night of the donor reception arrived with alarming speed. Elena stood in the small dressing room backstage at the Symphony Hall, trying to steady her breathing. She smoothed down the front of her borrowed dress. Deep blue evening gown Helen had arranged for her when she learned Elena didn't own anything suitable for the event. A soft knock at the door startled her. 10 minutes. Ms. Morales called a stagehand. Thank you, she replied, surprised at how calm her voice sounded compared to the chaos inside her. Elena turned back to the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Hair styled elegantly, makeup subtle but enhancing, the gown fitting perfectly. She looked like a concert pianist, not a waitress. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Another knock, more familiar this time. Elena, it's Helen. May I come in? Of course. Helen entered, resplendent in a black cocktail dress, a tablet clutched in one hand. How are you feeling? Like I might throw up, Elena admitted. Helen laughed warmly. That's completely normal. Even our regulars get nervous before important performances. She set her tablet down and came to stand beside Elena, meeting her eyes in the mirror. But I've heard you play now. You're ready for this. Elena nodded, trying to believe it. Who's out there? How many people? About 70 of our most generous supporters. Old money families, new tech entrepreneurs, a few celebrities who support the arts. Helen squeezed her shoulder. Don't think about who they are. Just play for yourself like you did at the restaurant. That was different, Elena protested. I had nothing to lose then. And what do you have to lose now? The question hung in the air. What did she have to lose? Her waitressing job was secure. Mr. Pearson had made that clear. If she bombed tonight, she could go back to her normal life. But something deeper was at stake. The rekindled hope that had been growing inside her since that night at the restaurant. A final knock at the door. It's time, called the stagehand. Helen gave her an encouraging smile. Ready or not? Elena followed Helen through the backstage area to the wings of the small recital hall. Peering around the curtain, she could see the elegantly dressed crowd mingling, champagne glasses in hand. At the far end of the room stood a beautiful Steinway, spotlit and waiting. Victor Walsh stepped to the center of the room, and the crowd gradually quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his commanding voice easily filling the space. Thank you for your continued support of our symphony and its community initiatives. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing a remarkable talent I recently discovered in the most unexpected of places. He went on to briefly tell the story of hearing Elena play at Café Luminoso, carefully omitting the part where he had mockingly challenged her. Elena listened, her heart hammering in her chest. So without further ado, please welcome Elena Morales. Polite applause filled the room as Elena walked toward the piano, focusing on keeping her steps steady despite her wobbling knees. She sat down at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the sea of curious faces. Somewhere in the middle, she spotted Mr. Rodriguez and Rose, who had taken the night off to come support her. Mr. Pearson stood near the back, giving her an encouraging nod. Elena took a deep breath and began with the Mendelssohn Spring Song, a piece filled with light and joy. As her fingers found the familiar patterns, the nervousness began to fade. She wasn't thinking about the wealthy donors anymore, or what this night might mean for her future. She was simply speaking through the music, telling a story of hope and renewal that matched her own journey. When the final notes of the first piece faded, the applause was warm and genuine. Encouraged, Elena moved into her next selection, a Chopin nocturne that showcased her ability to create delicate, ethereal sounds from the instrument. With each piece, she felt herself growing more comfortable, more present in the moment. The piano responded to her touch as if it knew her, helping her express things she couldn't put into words. The loss she had felt when giving up music, the quiet dignity of her years of hard work, and the unexpected joy of this second chance. For her final piece, she turned slightly toward the audience. I'd like to finish with Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, she said, her voice soft but clear. This piece has been a companion to me during years when I couldn't perform publicly. Playing it for you tonight feels like coming full circle. Elena poured everything into the performance, all the emotion of the past whirlwind week, all the years of silent longing, all the newfound hope for the future. The powerful chords resonated through the room, building to a climax that felt like a declaration. When the final notes died away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, their faces alight with genuine appreciation. Elena stood and bowed, a bit awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as the applause continued. Walsh approached from the side, applauding with the rest, and guided her to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced when the applause finally quieted, "what you've witnessed tonight is exactly why our community outreach programs are so vital. Talent exists everywhere, often hidden by circumstance. Your donations help us find and nurture that talent." He turned to Elena. "Ms. Morales has agreed to join our community concert series as a featured soloist, bringing performances like tonight's to neighborhoods throughout the city." More applause followed. As it subsided, people began to approach Elena, introducing themselves, asking questions about her background, her training with Abramovich, her favorite composers. An older woman in an elegant pantsuit pressed a business card into her hand. "I'm on the board of the Children's Music Foundation. We need teachers who can inspire young people. Someone with your talent and life experience would be perfect. Call me when you're ready." A young man who introduced himself as a talent agent offered to represent her when you're ready to record. Helen appeared at Elena's side, skillfully managing the flow of well-wishers, making sure Elena wasn't overwhelmed. It was nearly midnight when the last guests departed. Elena sat down heavily on a chair, exhausted but exhilarated. "Well done," Walsh said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. To new beginnings, they clinked glasses. Elena took a small sip, the bubbles tickling her nose. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said, "for seeing something in me." "I almost didn't," Walsh admitted, the frankness surprising her. "My initial challenge was one unkind, intended to embarrass you." He shook his head. "I'm glad you proved me wrong." "So am I." Daniel joined them, carrying a folder. "Elena, here's the schedule for the community concert series. First performance is in 2 weeks at the Northside Cultural Center." Elena took the folder, reality beginning to sink in. "So this is really happening?" "I'm going to be performing regularly." "As often as you want to," Walsh confirmed. "We pay our musicians fairly. Not a fortune, but enough that you could cut back on waitressing hours if you wanted to." The possibility hung in the air, tantalizing and a little frightening. Could she really start rebuilding her music career after all this time? 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at the city's main concert hall, peeking through the curtain at the filling seats. This wasn't a small donor reception or a community center performance. This was her debut with the full symphony orchestra, playing Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. In the front row, she could see Mr. Pearson, Rose, and Mr. Rodriguez, all dressed in their finest clothes. They had been her most loyal supporters, coming to every performance over the past months, cheering her on as she gradually rebuilt her confidence and technique. Mr. Pearson had kept his promise about piano evenings with Elena at the restaurant, which had become so popular they were now twice weekly. Those performances had helped Elena reconnect with her love of playing for an audience, in a familiar environment without too much pressure. But tonight was different. Tonight was the dream she had abandoned 7 years ago, suddenly, unexpectedly within reach again. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to find Walsh dressed in his conductor's tails. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Use it. Channel it into the music." He checked his watch. 5 minutes. "Remember what I told you in rehearsal? The orchestra is there to support me, not compete with me." Elena finished, smiling faintly. "Exactly." He squeezed her shoulder lightly. "You've earned this moment, Elena. Now go out there and show them why." As she walked onto the stage minutes later, the applause washing over her like a wave, Elena caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished surface of the grand piano. Gone was the uncertain waitress, replaced by a woman who had found her way back to herself. She sat at the bench, adjusted her gown, and nodded to Walsh. As the orchestra began the famous opening chords of the concerto, Elena felt a sense of rightness, of wholeness. The journey from that moment of cruel mockery to this standing ovation had not been easy or straightforward. There had been moments of doubt, of frustration, of fear, but as her fingers joined the orchestra, adding her voice to their collective sound, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not despite her years away from music, but because of them, because everything she had experienced, every struggle and setback, had deepened her understanding of what music could express. The music flowed through her and out into the world, carrying with it a simple truth. It's never too late to reclaim the pieces of yourself you thought were lost forever.